On a bitter January morning in 1921, a great five-masted schooner lay stranded on the outer edge of Diamond Shoals, with every sail set and not a single soul aboard. Plates were laid, a pot sat warm on the stove, the wheel was smashed, and 2 lifeboats were gone. What happened to the crew of the Carroll A Deering? This is the full account of the ship, the vanished men, the investigation that followed, and the theories that still circle like gulls above the graveyard of the Atlantic. The Carroll A Deering was not a pleasure yacht or a trim racing schooner. She was one of the last and grandest commercial sailing vessels of the age of canvas and wood. Built in Bath, Maine in 1919 for the G.G. Deering Company, Deering was a 5-masted wooden schooner of substantial length, often recorded at about 225 feet, designed to carry bulk cargo on long ocean runs. She looked like a floating forest of masts and rigging, a broad, deep hull, towering mast rigged with yards and stays, and a deck cluttered with blocks, lines, and heavy booms for handling sail and freight. Her job was honest, hard, and ordinary, moving coal and other bulk cargo in an era when steam was increasingly dominant, but sails still had utility on certain trades. The ship's owners and the men who sailed her belonged to a seafaring culture that trusted in maps, watchkeeping, seamanship, and the ritual of the sea. Life aboard a working schooner like the Deering was organized around the engine of manpower, reefing sails at dawn, trimming cargo for stability, whipping lines, mending canvas, tending the galley, and keeping a watch against hidden shoals and unpredictable weather. The crew were practical men, sailors, roustabouts, carpenters, cooks, each with a small set of skills that mattered when storms rose and the lights went black. By late 2020 and into January 21, the Deering had been operating in the South American trade. She had left northern waters, taken a cargo, reports commonly say coal, to Brazil, and then was returning north in ballast or light load when the final, fateful phase of her voyage began. In the closing days of January 2021, the Deering was sighted off the southeastern U.S. coast. Lightship keepers and passing captains would be among the last to see her moving about in those cold waters. On January 28-29, 1921, a lightship near Cape Fear, often recorded as the Cape Lookout or Diamond Shoals lightship, depending on the witness, logged seeing a 5-masted schooner that would later be identified as the Deering. The watchers on the lightship reported crew moving about oddly on the quarterdeck, and at one point an attempt at voice communication was made through a megaphone. The ship was observed to be sailing a course that could have taken her toward the deadly shoals south of Cape Hatteras. A few days later, on January 31st, the 1921 watchman on Hatteras Inlet or Cape Hatteras sighted the same schooner hard aground on the outer edge of Diamond Shoals. She lay with all or many of her sails set and with no apparent attempt to signal distress. Curiously, no flags or signals of alarm were flying. When the surf prevented immediate boarding, rescuers had to wait. When they finally were able to get alongside and go aboard, they found the ship abandoned. The account of what Coast Guard and life-saving crews found aboard the Deering is one of the most haunting sets of details in American maritime lore. Investigators described all sails set, though the vessel was aground and not making headway. The ship's steering equipment damaged, the wheel was shattered, the binnacle, which houses a ship's compass, and its box were stove in, and the rudder was found disengaged from its stock, suggesting violent, purposeful interference with steering. The logbook and navigation instruments were missing. The sextant and chronometer were gone. Both lifeboats were absent, and crew personal effects had been removed. In the galley, food preparation appeared to have been underway, stews on for the next meal, but the meal was untouched and the cookware cold by the time boarding was possible. Additional small details, a jacket hanging, boots in their places, and evidence that the ship had been functioning and then suddenly vacated. These elements together produced a chilling tableau. The ship was seaworthy enough to get to the shoals on sail. The men had not been physically wiped out. There were no bodies, and they had apparently left in haste or under duress, leaving behind instruments and other items of practical value, but taking lifeboats and certain personal gear. Records from the time indicate some turbulence in Deering's command. Captain William Merritt had become ill and was replaced for the voyage by W.B. Wormell. Ship rosters and company documents show a ship that had been to South America and returned with a mixture of professional seamen and hired hands. Some contemporary accounts also suggest personality conflicts, illness, and the strains of long voyages in tense weather. While these fragments do not explain an empty ship, they provide texture. This was not a crew of strangers, but a community that might at times be riven by pressure and rare violence. In the century since the Deering was boarded, theories have multiplied. Investigators, journalists, and curious minds have offered many competing explanations, some plausible, others fanciful. The main theories include piracy or seizure by another vessel. The suggestion here is straightforward. Another vessel, an oil-burning boat or some sort of chase vessel, came alongside either in darkness or during stormy weather and forcibly took the Deering's crew for reasons that might range from robbery to kidnapping. This hypothesis gained faint support from fragments found ashore. Fishermen reported seeing a message in a bottle whose text suggested the Deering had been captured by oil-burning boat something like chaser, a cryptic phrase that was widely reported in the press at the time. But the message is unverified, fragmentary, and hardly proof on its own. Mutiny or internal strife. A ship is a small society. Disputes, severe discipline, and perceived injustices can ignite mutiny, sometimes violent, often messy. On a schooner underway in the dark or amid fog, a mutiny could lead to a small band forcing the captain and officers into a lifeboat or vice versa. Yet the physical evidence, the smashed wheel and missing boats, can be read both ways, as evidence of a struggle or as staged damage to make it appear a ship's steering had failed. If mutiny did occur, it left no records, no survivors told the tale. Abandonment under threat, storm, fire, or fear. Witnesses described the Deering under sail in conditions that did not appear catastrophic. Still, the Outer Banks are notorious for sudden shoaling, fog, and deceptive currents. If the crew thought the ship was doomed by a hull breach, internal fire, or because of vulnerable position on the shoals, they might have launched lifeboats deliberately. But lifeboats launched in good sea conditions should yield survivors and a narrative. None turned up. The swift abandonment visible in the galley detail runs against a measured, well-ordered leaving. External law enforcement or rum-running conflict. The early 1920s were the early Prohibition years. Coastal waters teemed with rum runners and fast motor vessels. Some investigators speculated that the Deering encountered an unlawful cutter, either pirate-like smugglers or a capricious private vessel, leading to enforced removal of the crew. The oil-burning boat referenced in the bottle story fits a motor craft better than a sailing ship, but again, no direct evidence of such an encounter surfaced in official reports. Accident plus theft of instruments. Less dramatic, but practical. The Deering might have run into gear failure or shoal grounding that made the crew fear for lives. Lifeboats were lowered, abandoned, or taken by currents. Later, scavengers removed valuable articles from the wreck. Over time, drift buried and scattered evidence. This explanation fits several details, but does not explain the smashed wheel or the apparently staged condition of the deck.
Each theory has proponents and detractors. Investigators could point to elements that fit their favored narrative and ignore inconvenient details. The lack of survivors and the destruction of parts of the wreck by surf and dynamite removed any chance of refining hypotheses with material evidence. The U.S. Coast Guard and other authorities investigated. Teams boarded the Agile or similar cutters. Interviews were taken from lightship keepers, passing mariners, and local fishermen. The investigation produced detailed notes about the ship's condition, steering gear damage, missing lifeboats, displaced instruments, and an affirmation that the Deering had likely been seaworthy when discovered. Yet investigators could not reconstruct the crew's disappearance. Lacking witnesses, the formal inquiry reached no conclusive verdict. Over time, the wreck was declared a hazard, partially salvaged, and ultimately dynamited to prevent the broken hulk from endangering other navigation in the treacherous shoals. Pieces of the ship washed ashore and were repurposed by island residents. The rest sank into the sands and surf of the graveyard of the Atlantic. The mystery was therefore not resolved by the apparatus of law and maritime administration. The early 20th century investigative tools, spotty radio logs, imperfect record-keeping, and widely scattered eyewitness testimony had simply reached their limit where the sea did not. Cape Hatteras and Diamond Shoals have been the stage for centuries of shipwrecks, salvage, and tragic accidents. Local lore stores fragments of the Deering story as both cautionary tale and ghost story. Photographs of the beached hull, newspaper clippings of the day, and the accounts of lifesavers and lightship keepers persist in archives and island memory. The Deering became, in regional imagination, a sort of American Marie Celeste, a ship abandoned for reasons that ordinary logic has failed to explain. This blending of documentary oddity and folklore is part of why the story continues to fascinate historians, divers, and storytellers alike. If we still hope for an answer, what evidence might change everything? The kinds of evidence that could transform the Deering from mystery into explained loss are straightforward, if difficult to obtain. A recovered lifeboat with marks of struggle, a diary or letter washed ashore with names and a date, an unambiguous message in a bottle tied to the ship's crew, or the discovery of a skeletonized hull with clues to damage pattern that prove collision or deliberate assault. 70 years of storms, salvage, and erosion have taken much. The Diamond Shoals shift constantly. Wreckage that might once have been accessible now lies under layers of sand and water. The ocean in that sector is not only treacherous to mariners, it is deadly to evidence. Perhaps the most important thing the Deering story asks of us is to honor the human ledger. Whatever the cause, mutiny, piracy, accident, or some mixture, 20, 30, or more men vanished from a working world in which they mattered to families and communities. Their names, their jokes, their small acts of repair below decks, and hymn song on Sunday are recorded in company manifests and scattered probate papers. For the families who waited and hoped and then received only a formal notice of loss, the Deering was not a story but a wound. 17 decades ago, in an era between sail and steam, a large wooden ship was found empty and left in the wild surf of Diamond Shoals. The physical scene, set sails, a stove with food being prepared, shattered steering gear, missing lifeboats, and chronometer, resists tidy narrative. It invites questions about human behavior under pressure, about criminality and the opportunism of illegal vessels, and about how institutions search and record when the sea refuses to cooperate. It also gives us, in the quiet images and yellowed files, a reminder of how fragile human order is when confronted by ocean and unknown. Until a meaningful new clue emerges, be it a recovered document, a new archaeological survey, or a testimony tucked into an old trunk in some descendant's attic, the Carroll A. Deering will remain among the great unsolved maritime mysteries, a ghost ship whose silence still sounds like a distant bell.